Okay, good morning. My name is Troy Whittaker, and I'm Principal Architect for ITS Partners. And today we're going to be talking about Azure from Microsoft and Configuration Manager 2012 SP1 and how those two products can integrate and help accelerate your Configuration Manager architecture. So first up, I have just a few slides here to power through before we get to the real meat of the presentation. For those of you that don't know ITS very well, we're headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We also have an operating subsidiary in Toronto. We've been in business for quite a while, a big chunk of that time with practical systems management implementation experience. We are also currently a certified partner with several top-tier organizations. Microsoft, we're certified with a gold competency in management and virtualization. We are a ServiceNow certified partner, as well as the Semantic National and Platinum partner. We are really an engineering-centric culture, and what that means is that our organization leads with engineering, not with other areas of operation. That really drives great innovation and curation of our intellectual capital, and we really think that's where our strength in the consulting and engineering markets are at. We do have quite a few engineer consultants these days. They're distributed all over the lower 48, as well as a couple of engineers up in Canada. So we can cover any area that you may be in. We really only require that our consultants are near a major airport, which most of them are, and we'll go anywhere and help you solve problems and deliver business benefits. So on to today's topic. There's a few notes I want to go over before we get into a demo of how the solutions are integrated. What you need to know first is the integration is there out of the box, so this isn't something that needs to be built. There are a few supporting technologies that need to be configured, but what you need at a base level is already in the product at the 2012 SP1 level. Configuration Manager console is going to be your management point for interacting with the solutions. And if you do need to obtain the prerequisites or any planning information about how to plan for distribution point architecture, you can follow the URL on this screen, or just go to TechNet and search for Configuration Manager supported configurations, and then further search for cloud distribution points. Now up first, you'll need a couple of things to get started. One obviously would be an active Azure subscription for your organization. If you are a partner organization, you do get a complimentary subscription. If you do have an MSDN subscription of the appropriate type, you also get a subscription to Azure through that. You can go to windowsazure.com and get more details on how to activate that subscription, but that's enough for you to get started on Azure as far as the services we'll be showing today. You will need to generate management certificates and service certificates. This will primarily be done within your Active Directory from your own certification authority, where you will create a couple of certificates, and then you'll upload one as a management certificate to Windows Azure so that it can authenticate the services from your on-premise implementation that are trying to authenticate and send out packages. You will need to talk with your Azure administrator for your company, so somebody who's in that role and can help you provision services in Azure and also install and manage the management certificate. And then finally, I do want to make a note here. Azure is a consumption-based model. So you do need to know what your subscription limits are, that those are set. You know where your overruns are for cost and whether or not your subscription will allow you to go over before charges are initiated, and have a mitigation plan in place for when you do exceed your subscription. So having a cloud-based distribution point is a powerful piece of technology, and with any power, comes responsibility. So make sure that you understand how that's going to impact your subscription services cost and what you're going to do to mitigate when you run up against that cap. Now, I will show you today how to put in some safeguards on the Configuration Manager on-premise side to ensure that you don't go over that subscription, but just make sure that the appropriate planning is in place there. So next, let's go ahead and go do that. So I'm going to switch over to my Configuration Manager, and you'll notice that I'm already in the administration workspace, and I've highlighted the cloud entry here on the menu. So if you're familiar with Configuration Manager, either from 2007 or 2 or 2012 or 2012 SP1, this should all look fairly familiar. So under Administration, then Hierarchy Configuration folder, you'll find Cloud. Now I will show you how to do this, but I want to set up a couple of things first. So I'm going to minimize my Configuration Manager console, and I'm going to minimize my MMC, and you'll see a couple of things here. The first thing that we need to do is we need to generate a certificate that's appropriate for managing this service up on Azure. So this is a very simple command line that can be run with a MakeCert utility that can be obtained through Visual Studio or download from Microsoft. You may likely already have that on some of your 2008 R2 servers. You will need to install it on Server 2012 through some mean. But it's a pretty simple, straightforward approach. You need all of the switches that are indicated on the screen here. The most important one is the container ID needs to match the FQDN of your configuration manager. So it's a good time to point out that when you provision a cloud distribution point, this is per primary site. So what's really nice about having a highly scalable and elastic cloud service to put distribution points on is you don't need to create multiple distribution points or multiple groups or manage all of that. You're really just making a service available, and Windows Azure is going to do the scalability and the elasticity for you. It's almost a set it and forget it kind of technology. There's a little bit of management that goes into it, into what kind of content you want to put up there, and making sure that you don't overrun your subscription limit. But generally, it's a fairly easy technology to operate. Now, the name of the certificate is really not that important. Obviously, I named it something simple here so I could recognize it. You'll notice here on my desktop now I actually have my certificate, and I also have a copy of that certificate with a private key included. So when you actually, after you generate the certificate, you'll go into your MMC. In typical process here, we'll go and add the snap-in for certificates. We're going to do this in the My User Account context. And the reason we're doing that is because I'm actually logged in as the service account for my configuration manager right now. That may be different in your environment, so please make sure you consult your configuration manager administrator or architect, and also your Azure administrator and potentially Active Directory admins, the right folks that would know how certificates need to be generated from your internal CA and how that should be done per your best practice. But today I'll kind of be showing you just sort of the bare minimum attributes that need to be there. So I'm going to add this snap into my MMC, and then I'm going to navigate down to the personal store and look in certificates. And so you'll see the output of my MakeCert here, which is going to be my certificate. I set an expiration date pretty far out in the future just for testing purposes, so you'll need to adhere to whatever your internal controls or policies are there. And then really the next steps are to export from right-click and then all tasks. Then you're going to need to export this certificate twice. Now I'm not going to do it today because I've already prepared it for the purposes of this webinar, but you would export it once without the private key. You do want to choose DER encoded X509 and then just go ahead and save the cert out. The second time that you export this cert, we do want to include the private key this time. And there's one particular option you need to set here. So I'm going to choose yes, export the private key. On the next page, you need to uncheck include all certificates in the certification path. For whatever reason, this causes the export to fail on Server 2012. So uncheck that. It's not necessary for our purposes anyways. And you can add groups or usernames here. I have, in my example, just gone with a password encoded in the private key itself. And so I'll be supplying that when we provision our cloud distribution point today. So in kind of a simulated manner here, I've already created my certificates and those are present. So I'm ready to go into my Configuration Manager console and go ahead and provision a cloud distribution point. Now once you're in the administration workspace and you've navigated to Overview, Hierarchy, Configuration, and then Cloud, there are 3 different entry points to provision this service. You can right-click on Cloud in the menu and create it there. You can right-click on the white space and create it there. You can also go up to the ribbon here and click this button. All brings you to the same place. Now the first thing you'll need to do is supply a subscription ID for your Azure subscription. Now I already happen to have mine in the clipboard, so that's convenient for me. You'll see this string if you go to Windows Azure and click on subscriptions and then manage your subscriptions, and you'll be able to retrieve the subscription ID for each of your individual subscriptions there. Once you supply that ID, then we need to go find our management certificate, which I've conveniently located on a desktop. Now keep in mind I'm actually choosing the PFX file here. So this is the certificate I exported with the private key. When I supply the path to that certificate, it's going to prompt me for the password that I encoded into the private key certificate in the prior step. So I'll go ahead and provide that now. You'll notice that it was accepted, and I'm ready to proceed to the next step. So what has just happened here is my configuration manager has gone up and queried an API on Windows Azure, and it's returned a list of regions, which would really equate to data centers for Azure that I can locate my distribution point in. Now, for the purposes of my example here, although I have many choices, I'm going to go ahead and choose East US because that's where I'm located, and I think it'll be the most convenient. And then I'm going to call this my Cloud DP East region. Now you'll notice here I also have the option to select a primary site. Keeping in mind that we already talked about a cloud distribution point being a one-to-one relationship to each primary site. If you look at your architecture, whether that's something you have in place today or you're planning for now, when you look at whether or not you're going to have multiple primary sites, you want to take into account the idea of whether or not you'll be managing some transient endpoints out on the internet or mobile devices that you may want to leverage a cloud distribution point. And so just keep that in mind as you decide where you're going to put things in Windows Azure as far as the data center region and where your primary sites might map in your architecture to such. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go grab our certificate file again. Now you may ask yourself, why do I need to do this a second time? I don't know the answer to. I just know that the wizard asked for it. So let me just make sure I have typed in the correct password here. And I have. And you'll see that it returns the FQDN of my configuration manager from the certificate because I encoded that as the common name. So we're ready to proceed now. I'm going to click Next. Here's where we can set some alert thresholds. So I want to make sure that I don't exceed my subscription limit for data transfer or storage. So I'm going to set a couple of things here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to limit my storage alert threshold to 50 gigabytes. And then I'm going to generate a warning when I'm at 75% of that threshold, and then a critical alert at 95% of that threshold. I'm also going to limit my transfer monthly to 250 gigabytes. Now, obviously, these are somewhat unrealistic numbers in a production environment, but if you are just doing this in a test scenario, and you want to put a few clients out there maybe on the internet and test some package distribution to them, then this is a good way to keep that transfer down and keep the storage down so that you don't use up your subscription and deny other folks in your company access to it or possibly incur some additional charges there. Now I'm going to go ahead and repeat what I did above, which is to set my warning at 75% and my critical alert at 95%. So as typical with the Microsoft Wizard approach here, we'll get a summary of the activity that we're going to perform here, which is just a review that we have put in our subscription ID, we've identified our management cert, we know what services we're going to use, and then we've put in some alerting for storage and for transfer. So I'm going to click Next to proceed. We've now begun to create my cloud distribution point, so I'm going to close the wizard. You'll notice that it currently gives me the status of provisioning. I'm going to go ahead and change to the monitoring workspace here, and you'll notice that I have some distribution point configuration status here, so I'm just going to refresh this window, and you'll see that it's not quite ready yet, so I have the red X. I have no status. We're going to give that just a couple of more minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to go up here and make sure that we put my Azure distribution point up into my Cloud DP's distribution point group. So for those of you that don't know, cloud distribution point, distribution point groups are a new feature in 2012 SP1 that allow us to group distribution points by some attribute of our choosing rather than having to be just subnet-based or site-based. I can do this for, let's say, if I have business unit or by a collection or whether they're in Azure or not in Azure. There's a lot of capability for me there. So let's peek back over at administration. I'm going to check on distribution points. And so we can see now that I have a cloud distribution point. It appears that it may be ready. So let's look at our groups, Cloud DPs. I'm just going to go drill down in my Cloud DPs distribution point group here. Look at my collections that are targeted. So it looks like I do have a couple of collections that are using this. And then under members, you can see that even though I just created this distribution point in the cloud, it's already been automatically assigned because my primary site is assigned to use this distribution point group. So All good there. So let's go back over to monitoring, and let's just refresh our status for configuration. So it may just take another minute for that summarization to go there. I'm going to switch over to my software library and talk a little bit about what we can do there. So a couple of things you need to know about Cloud DPs. One, it's not for all types of content. So if you're looking to do software updates or operating system images, it's really not the appropriate place for that. We can't support PXE in Azure today, and we cannot support software updates as in WSUS. We can, however, support anything that you can basically put into packages. The limits really come around what you're willing to spend as far as data storage and transfer. But I think some appropriate uses of this technology are if you have quite a few endpoints that are transient or external. An example might be in your organization if you have a sales force that rarely are on a corporate network, and perhaps you don't have VPN today or you're trying to migrate away from it. You may only see those employees when they bring a laptop up in a Starbucks, or they're out on their Wi-Fi hotspot somewhere, or they're in a hotel. And one of the challenges about having these users that are transient out there is it becomes very difficult to manage them and get software to them and install management agents and execute changes on them, whether that's through a task sequence or otherwise. And what the Azure distribution point gives us is really a way to manage internet-based clients from the internet without using your internal network bandwidth or storage to service those clients. So I think that's a great sort of part of the puzzle for capability there. A few things I can think of if you were going to, let's say, roll out Office 2013 to your organization, it wouldn't be a very good use of resources to have every client maybe ship their laptop in, right? So if you have a bunch of mobile employees, you don't want them to actually ship the laptops in just to have software installed. We don't want to have to create a VPN service just for them to do that. It may be very difficult to do it while they're out on transient networks because they're in very unpredictable environments, and we don't know that we can establish connectivity with whatever your chosen management tool is. So if we have the ability to assign a policy to them to just install Office 2013, but have the content for that install pulled from Azure, it's a much quicker path and many fewer hops, and you're not bearing the brunt of that bandwidth usage on your egress point of your network. So I think this is a tremendous advantage. A couple of things you need to keep in mind is, again, we're really only talking about software packages here, and there are a couple of other requirements. One is that you cannot run an install from a Cloud DP distribution point source. This package must be enabled to allow the client to download the package and then install it locally. The other thing that you need to do is under your client settings. So I'm going to go to Administration, and I'm going to look at my client settings. Whether you do this in your default client settings policy or in a custom client settings policy, there are a couple of options you want to be aware of. First of all, you need to allow access to the Cloud DP in the Cloud Services client setting pane. So this is really important. And the reason I've done it in a separate policy is I may have 90% of my endpoints that are on the internal network all the time. There's no reason for me to allow them to access the Cloud DP. They would go to their local distribution point anyways, but there's no reason to allow them to fall back to that, because why bear the brunt of that subscription use for storage and transfer, and why incur the bandwidth cost, at least on my ingress point to my network, to bring that content back in where it's already at. So I've applied this in a separate policy that I apply just to endpoints that I know to be external or I can predict will be external. And then the second thing is, especially if you have clients with WAN devices in them to join Verizon or AT&T or some other network, we also don't want to go over our bandwidth caps or limits for those plans. So we do want to make sure that we enable the setting to limit the client communication and prevent sort of package distribution when they're using those connections. So I guess really what I'm saying is take advantage of unmetered connections that are external to your network, whether those are hotels or coffee shops or what have you, and then make sure that you protect your network, both ingress and egress, with Configuration Manager client policy. So a couple more things I want to show you today. I'm going to switch back to my software library, and if we just look at my USMT package here, I'm going to go ahead and just look at the properties. And we can look at a few options about this, right? We can always, update our distribution point on schedule. Your cloud DPs are subject to that policy as well. Some settings are not relevant to cloud DP, but generally that would be fairly transparent to you. They're treated just like a regular DP, except where the content is stored and where it gets served from. And then we can also actually distribute content directly to those. So in this case, I'm going to actually distribute my USMT package, and I'm going to send it to my Cloud DP directly. So you can see right here in the pop-up that it identifies that as a cloud distribution point. And I'm going to click through and close my summary. And now I have just distributed my USMT package to my Cloud DP. And we can go back to the monitoring workspace here and check on a couple of things. So I'm still showing a red X here. I think that just may be waiting for summarization to run. Here's my Cloud DP group. So let's look at our content status and see if we have an in progress. And we do, so we can see that the transfer manager's already been instructed to send the content to the distribution point, and that'll be uploaded. A couple of other things that we can look at here before we kind of wrap this up. Under administration, and let's look at cloud. If we look at properties here, so we can see you can always refer back to your subscription ID. These are the settings that we configured in the wizard. These are our alerts, so we can go back and change these at any time we want. And then we can also view per Cloud DP which content has been distributed to it. And if you do ever have trouble with clients that are unable to get that content and you know it's been out there for a while, you can come into the properties of the Cloud DP and navigate to the appropriate package and then click the redistribute button, which will start the content transfer operation over for you. So I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint here, and that's really it. It's just that easy. I will say that the provisioning process takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes in my experience. And then, of course, your content transfer is going to be subject to a lot of variables, right? Your egress network speed, how far you're going, how many network hops, the quality of that connection, the size of the content, the number of files, those kinds of things. But I encourage you to go out and test that. If you have an MSDN subscription with the Azure benefit included, it'd be great to activate that today and start testing with it. I will tell you that Microsoft does you a great favor by actually limiting those complimentary subscriptions to $0, so that you cannot exceed that without explicitly going in and doing so. So you can feel pretty confident in going out and testing this, at least in a pre-production scenario where you don't want to incur any costs, and Microsoft definitely facilitates that for you. Go check out Windows Azure today because it's a great service. There's so much capability there that people are just starting to uncover. And today we really just wanted to highlight one of those and show you how an on-premise configuration manager architecture can really take advantage and add some scalability using Windows Azure. You can contact ITS Delivers at the information here on the screen, so itsdelivers.com on the web, at ITS_partners on Twitter, or via phone at 877-258-4747. So again, my name is Troy Whittaker, Principal Architect for ITS Partners. I thank you for your time and attention today. Thanks again for your time, and have a great day.